I was adopted, but when I found my biological parents, I uncovered a horrible secret about my childhood. I always knew I was different, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. From a young age, I'd been adopted, and while I never felt unloved or unwanted, there was always a quiet, unspoken gap in my life. My adoptive parents were kind, warm, and gave me everything I needed, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing. It wasn't that I longed for a different family, but rather, I was curious about where I came from, who I looked like, and why I was given up in the first place. The day I turned 18, my adoptive parents gave me something I had always wanted, the key to my past. They handed me the envelope containing my adoption papers and a letter with my biological mother's name and contact information. I remember my hands shaking as I opened the envelope, the weight of the moment settling in as if I was about to open a door to a different life. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that jumping into the unknown would change everything. For years, I had imagined what my biological parents might be like. Would they look like me? Would we share the same interests? And most of all, why had they chosen to give me up? These questions swirled in my mind constantly, and now, at 18, I was finally able to find some answers. But I never could have imagined how this search would change the course of my life forever. I started by reaching out to my biological mother. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was hoping for a warm welcome, a reunion filled with joy, perhaps even tears of happiness. Instead, I received a terse, almost cold reply. She said she was open to meeting, but the letter left me with more questions than answers. There was something hidden in her words, something she wasn't telling me. Despite the unsettling tone, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she just needed time to process the emotions of the past 18 years. After all, this wasn't just a simple meeting. It was the beginning of a new chapter in both of our lives. I arranged to meet her at a small cafe. I told myself it was just a meeting, not something to stress about, but as the day drew nearer, the anxiety began to set in. I had no idea what to expect. Would she be someone I could connect with, or would there be a distance between us that couldn't be bridged? The day arrived, and I walked into the cafe with a nervous heart, scanning the room for a familiar face. My eyes landed on a woman sitting alone at a table, her gaze fixed on the menu in front of her. She didn't look like the mother I had imagined, yet something about her felt familiar, almost like I had seen her before in a dream. She was older, her face lined with time, but her eyes were the same color as mine. I walked up to her, my heart racing in my chest, unsure of what to say. She looked up, and for a moment we just stared at each other. It was like we were both trying to recognize each other, as if the years apart had clouded our memories. Finally, she stood up and with a shaky voice said, "I'm your mother." I sat down across from her, unsure of how to begin. The silence between us was thick, laden with years of questions and unspoken words. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "I know you've been wondering why I gave you up," she said. "I'm here to tell you the truth." At that moment, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that would fill the gaps in my life with answers. But as she spoke, I began to realize that the truth she was about to reveal was nothing like I expected. She told me a story that was so far removed from anything I had imagined that it felt like a nightmare. She spoke of her youth, how she was a victim of a series of traumatic events that had shaped her life in ways I couldn't comprehend. She told me about an abusive relationship, a terrible betrayal, and the crushing weight of making a decision that haunted her every day. She said she had no choice but to give me up, but there was something in her tone, something buried deep in her words that made me wonder, was this the whole truth? As she continued speaking, I started to notice the cracks in her story. Some details didn't add up, and her eyes avoided mine whenever she mentioned certain parts of her past. There was a darkness in her past that she wasn't revealing, and it made my curiosity grow even stronger. Why hadn't she been completely honest with me? What was she hiding? Just as I was about to ask her more about the inconsistencies in her story, she suddenly grew silent, her eyes welling up with tears. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she took mine. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you to know this, but there's something else you need to know about your childhood." The air seemed to freeze, and I felt my heart skip a beat. There was more than what she had already told me. What could be worse than the tragedy she had just shared? My mind raced as I braced myself for what was coming next, but little did I know, the truth I was about to hear would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my past, and who I really was. Her hand was still trembling as it rested on mine, and for a moment I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. I had just heard about her tumultuous past, her painful decision to give me up, and the intense regret that had followed her throughout her life. But now it was clear there was more to the story than she was letting on. I could see it in her eyes, the hesitation, the fear, the way she seemed to want to say something but couldn't bring herself to. I could feel the tension between us like a palpable force, pulling us apart even as we sat inches from each other. "I didn't want you to find out," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now that you're here, I have no choice but to tell you the full truth." The words felt like a bomb about to explode. I could see it in her face. She was afraid. The woman who had once given me up, the woman who had spent 18 years living with the consequences of that decision, was now holding back something even more devastating. What was she so afraid of? What could possibly be worse than what she had already shared? "I was involved with someone before I gave you up," she continued, her voice faltering. "He wasn't a good person. He was controlling, manipulative, and—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Her eyes glistened with the kind of pain that no mother should ever have to experience. I leaned forward, trying to read her, trying to understand what she wasn't saying. "What happened? What did he do?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. The room suddenly felt colder, the air heavier, as if something dark had seeped into the very walls of the cafe. She stopped herself again, her hand clenching mine tighter, as though it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "He hurt me in ways I can't even explain, and after everything he did, I found out I was pregnant with you." I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. My biological mother, this woman who I had just met, who was supposed to be a stranger to me, had gone through something so horrible, so traumatic, and I hadn't even known. For all these years, I had imagined her life, built up these stories in my mind about her, and yet the truth was far more horrifying than anything I could have come up with. I wanted to reach out and comfort her, but there was a gnawing suspicion in my gut, a sense that something was still being left unsaid. "Why didn't you keep me?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. It was a question that had plagued my thoughts for years, a question I thought I was finally ready to hear the truth about. Her eyes darkened and she pulled her hand back, looking away. "I didn't have a choice. He made sure of that." The words were bitter and she spat them out like they were poison. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was already trapped. He had control over every aspect of my life. My family had disowned me by then and I was alone. He told me that if I kept you, he would make sure you'd never have a life worth living. He would destroy everything." Her voice cracked as she spoke, and I saw the pain in her face, a pain that had obviously been festering for years. "Did he hurt you, physically?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The thought of what she must have endured made my blood run cold. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, he hurt me in ways that no one should ever be hurt, but I couldn't escape. Not then, not until I had no other choice." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I thought I was doing the right thing by giving you up. I thought that by leaving you in the hands of someone who could provide for you, you'd have a better life than I could give you. But now—" Her voice faltered again, and I could see that she was struggling to find the right words. "Now, I wonder if I made the biggest mistake of my life." I could feel my heart shattering as I listened to her, but even more so when I realized that there was still more she wasn't telling me. There was a heaviness in her eyes, something that hinted at an even deeper darkness, and I had to know what it was. "You still haven't told me everything, have you?" I said, the question more of an accusation than a request. I couldn't let this go. The pieces of her story didn't fit together, and I knew there was something I needed to understand. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before answering. "No, I haven't told you everything. There's more. Something that I didn't want you to know." She paused, looking at me, her gaze finally steady. "Something that I should have told you a long time ago." My mind raced as I tried to piece together what she was holding back. What could be worse than the abuse she had already described? What could possibly be so terrible that she couldn't bear to tell me? "I found out something about you," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Something about your birth, about what happened before you were born." My pulse quickened and I felt a chill creep down my spine. The room seemed to close in on me and I struggled to breathe as she spoke. "Before you were born, I didn't know it at the time, but I was carrying you into a nightmare. My ex, he wasn't just abusive, he was dangerous. And when I found out I was pregnant, he started making threats. He said he would kill me if I didn't get rid of the baby. He even went so far as to say that he'd make sure you'd never survive if I tried to keep you." She paused, staring at her hands. I didn't know what to do. I was terrified. I could hardly breathe as I processed her words. The story she was telling was becoming more and more horrific with every sentence. "What happened?" I managed to choke out. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a kind of pain that I couldn't quite understand. I didn't know how far he was willing to go, but I found out the truth in the most horrifying way possible. My heart stopped as I realized that whatever she was about to tell me was going to change everything. This was no longer just a story about a woman who had given her child up for adoption. This was about something far darker, far more sinister, something I was connected to in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. She took another deep breath, the air thick with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I didn't give you up because I wanted to. I did it because I thought it was the only way to save your life. But now, after everything I've learned, I'm not so sure. I know that I was wrong." The silence between us stretched on, and for the first time, I understood that the truth she was telling me wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about something much bigger, something that would shake the very foundation of who I was and who I thought I could trust, something that would haunt me forever. The words hung in the air like an unspoken curse, and I could feel my heart thudding painfully in my chest. There was something in my mother's eyes now, a deep, almost unbearable sadness that was so foreign, so raw, that it made me question everything I had believed about my life, my past, and even my identity. Her voice was quieter now, almost too soft to hear, but I leaned in closer, afraid to miss even a single syllable. The weight of the silence was suffocating, each passing moment stretching into infinity as I waited for her to continue. "I was wrong," she repeated, her voice cracking under the strain of the words. "I thought giving you up would keep you safe, but now I know the truth. It was never about protecting you. It was about keeping you away from something that could have destroyed us both." My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of her words, but they didn't make sense. What could be so dangerous that she felt the need to keep me away from it? The entire story she had just told me had already been so disturbing: abuse, manipulation, threats of violence. But this was different. This was something I hadn't been prepared for. "Mom," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible, "what are you talking about? What truth? What could possibly be worse than everything you've already told me?" Her eyes flickered with something, fear, guilt, maybe even regret, and she looked away, staring down at her hands. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The tension in the air was unbearable, like we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, and I had no idea how far the fall would be if I dared to take one more step closer. Finally, she spoke again, her voice shaking as she began to unravel the twisted web of secrets that had been hidden for so long. It wasn't just him, she said, her words coming out slowly as though they had been trapped inside her for years. The man I was with, he wasn't just abusive. He wasn't just a monster. He had connections, dangerous connections. People who were involved in things you can't even imagine. And I was too young, too naive to see it at the time. I felt a chill spread through my body as she spoke. My heart beat faster and my mind raced to understand what she was telling me. Dangerous connections. What did she mean? What could be worse than the abuse she had already described? Was she talking about something criminal? Something that went beyond physical violence? I didn't know the full extent of it until after I left him, she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. But when I found out I was pregnant, things changed. His behavior became more erratic, more violent. He started threatening me, telling me that if I didn't do exactly what he said, I would regret it, that he would make sure no one would ever find me or you. He was connected to people who had power, who could make things happen, things I couldn't stop. I felt my stomach churn as I processed what she was saying. What do you mean by people who had power? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear anything worse than what I had already heard, but I couldn't help myself. This was my mother, and the person she was describing, the man she had been involved with, was someone who had been a part of my life in ways I hadn't even realized. I needed to know the truth, no matter how dark it seemed. His connections weren't just local, she said, her voice trembling as she spoke. They reached far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I don't even know the full scope of it, but I know enough to understand that he wasn't just a man who hurt me. He was part of something much bigger, a world of crime, corruption, and danger. And the moment he found out I was pregnant, he started making plans to get rid of me, to get rid of us both. Her words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I could feel the walls closing in on me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I was frozen. This man, the man who had caused her so much pain, was connected to something much larger than either of us could have imagined. And somehow, I was tangled up in it. But how does that explain? Why you gave me up? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. I needed to understand. I needed to understand why my life had unfolded the way it had, why I had been separated from my biological mother, why I had spent 18 years without knowing any of this. Because in the end, it wasn't just about keeping you safe, she said, her voice so low that I could barely hear her. It was about protecting you from the people who were involved with him, the people who were connected to him. They would have found you, they would have found me, and they would have taken you, just to make sure that I didn't interfere with their plans. That's why I gave you up. That's why I made the decision to let someone else raise you, I thought. I thought that if I did, they wouldn't find you. They wouldn't hurt you. Her words were like a punch to the gut, and I felt the air leave my lungs. You thought I'd be safer with strangers? I asked, my voice cracking with disbelief. You thought it was better to let me grow up with people I didn't know instead of protecting me yourself. She flinched at my words, and I immediately regretted the harshness in my tone. But the anger, the hurt, was overwhelming. How could she have made that decision for me? How could she have believed that was the best option? I didn't want to believe me, she said, her voice filled with sorrow. But I didn't have a choice. I thought that if you were raised by someone else, by people who didn't know anything about the situation, they wouldn't be able to find you. They wouldn't be able to reach you, and I would be free to live my life to get away from him, from them. But why didn't you tell me the truth sooner? I asked, the words coming out bitter and sharp. Why didn't you tell me everything when I first reached out? Why didn't you warn me? She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and for the first time I saw the weight of the guilt she had been carrying. I wanted to. I wanted to tell you everything, but I was afraid that if you knew the truth, it would put you in danger. I didn't want you to get involved in this. I didn't want you to find out that the people who were part of his world might still be watching us, that they might come after you now. A cold wave of fear washed over me as her words sank in. The people she was talking about, these dangerous, powerful individuals, could still be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that I knew the truth, Now that I was no longer a stranger to this world, I could feel the weight of that danger bearing down on me. But there was something else, something that nagged at me, a question that had been growing in the back of my mind ever since I first sat down with her. "You said you learned the truth after you left him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What truth? What did you find out about him? About me?" Her eyes darkened and she took a deep breath before answering. "I found out that the man I was with wasn't just a criminal. He was connected to something far darker, something that involved not just me but others who were also affected by his actions. And the more I learned, the more I realized that he wasn't just threatening me. He was using me to get to someone else, someone who might be you." The words hit me like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My mother's face twisted with grief, and I could see the toll this truth had taken on her. The man she had been involved with, the one who had abused her, the one who had forced her to give me up, he had been using her, and perhaps even me, for something far more sinister. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. All I knew was that the world I had believed in, the world where everything made sense, had just crumbled into dust. My life, my entire existence, was built on a lie that had been carefully crafted to protect me from the very people who were now lurking in the shadows, waiting to find me. And there was nothing I could do to escape it. The weight of her words felt like a suffocating fog, closing in around me. My mind raced as I tried to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. She hadn't just given me up to protect me from an abusive man. No. She had given me up to shield me from something far more dangerous, something that had the power to destroy my entire life without me even knowing. A dangerous network of people, some of whom I had no doubt were still out there, still watching, still waiting. But there was something else, something I needed to understand. "You said he was using you to get to someone else," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain composed. "What do you mean? Who else is involved in this? What did he want with me?" Her eyes darted away from mine, and for a moment I thought she might say nothing more. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I could see the fear in her expression, the lingering effects of the trauma she had experienced. She had lived with this burden for so long, and now, after all these years, she was finally telling me the truth. But there was more. There had to be more. If I was to truly understand why my life had turned out the way it had, I needed to know everything. "Before you were born," she began, her voice quieter now, "I didn't just have to deal with him. I had to deal with the people he was connected to. They weren't just criminals. Well, some of them were. But others were involved in things that no one should ever have to know about. Things that were far darker than what you could imagine." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Her words had gone from vague descriptions of abuse to something far more terrifying, something that involved shadowy figures whose very existence seemed to be hidden beneath layers of secrecy. I had no idea what she was referring to, but I could feel the undercurrent of fear in her voice, and it was starting to seep into my own consciousness. "How does this all tie back to me?" I asked, the question burning in my chest. "Why would they want me? What does all of this have to do with me?" She hesitated again, her eyes flickering with a mix of guilt and fear. Then, as though making a decision, she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "Because you weren't just a child. You were part of something much bigger, something that started before you were born. You were part of a plan that involved me and you and him, but I didn't know any of this until after you were born." I sat back in my chair, struggling to process her words. Part of a plan? What kind of plan? And why would they involve me? These questions that seemed so far removed from my ordinary, everyday life, were now the core of everything I had known. My very existence was tied to something I couldn't comprehend. "After you were born," she continued, "I tried to escape. I thought I could start over, leave him behind. But I couldn't escape from the people he was connected to. I couldn't hide. They found me, and they told me something I'll never forget." Her hands were trembling again, and I could see her struggling to keep her composure. My heart pounded as I waited for her to say what I feared she was about to say. I had no idea what kind of truth could possibly make her shake with terror like this. "They told me you were special," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "That you weren't just any child. That your birth had been part of a larger plan, a plan that they had been working on for years. They said that you were important, that you had a future that was tied to theirs, that they would use you one way or another." My head spun. What did she mean? How could I be special? How could my birth have been part of some larger, sinister plan? I wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but I could only sit there, stunned, unable to process the weight of her words. "Who were these people?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hoarse. "Who were they, and why were they so interested in me?" She closed her eyes for a moment, as though bracing herself before revealing more. "I don't know all the details," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "But I know enough to understand that they were powerful. They weren't just criminals. They were connected to people who controlled things in the shadows. People who had the resources to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And they didn't care who got hurt in the process. I wasn't the only one they had their eyes on." My mind raced as I tried to understand the enormity of what she was describing. Powerful people controlling things in the shadows. How could I possibly be involved in this? My entire life had been normal. If anything, it had been painfully average. And yet, here I was, learning that I had been a part of something much darker, something that had been planned before I was even born. "And what happened after that?" I asked, barely able to contain the desperation in my voice. "What did they want with me? What did they do?" She took a deep breath, and for the first time since she began her story, I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes. An anger so raw, so fierce, that it seemed to burn through the fear that had dominated her face until now. "They told me that they had no intention of letting you live a normal life," she said, her voice firm now. "They told me that you were part of a larger scheme, and that they would use you as a tool to get what they wanted. They didn't care that you were a baby, that you were innocent. You were nothing more than a means to an end." I recoiled at her words. The thought of being used, manipulated, turned into a pawn for someone else's gain, it was too much to bear. But the worst part was that, despite the horror of what she was saying, I could feel the truth of it deep in my bones. There was something in her voice that told me she wasn't lying. She was telling me the truth, even if it was the hardest truth I'd ever heard. "I had no choice but to give you up," she continued, her voice breaking once more. "I didn't want to. I didn't want to lose you, but I couldn't protect you from them. They had already set their sights on you, and if I kept you, they would have come after us both. They would have used you for whatever twisted purpose they had, and I couldn't let that happen." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The truth she was revealing was far worse than anything I had imagined. I had spent years wondering why I was adopted, why my life was so different from everyone else's, and now I knew. I had been part of a plan from the very beginning, a plan that was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than I could have ever understood. "What did you do?" I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth. "How did you protect me?" She looked away, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I gave you up to people I thought I could trust. I thought that by placing you with strangers, you'd be safe, but I never imagined the danger would follow you. I never imagined that they'd find you again, even after all these years. I thought I had protected you, but I was wrong." Her voice cracked with the weight of her regret, and I could see the depth of her pain. The woman who had once been my mother, the woman who had given me life, was now broken, destroyed by the choices she had been forced to make. "Are they still looking for me?" I whispered, my voice trembling as the fear I had been repressing finally bubbled to the surface. "Are they still after me?" Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in our conversation, I saw the truth in her gaze. The truth that scared her as much as it scared me. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I know they're out there, and now that you found me, now that you know the truth, I'm afraid they'll come after you again." The finality in her words hung in the air, suffocating us both. The world I had known, the life I had lived, was no longer mine to claim. It had been hijacked long ago, and now there was no going back. The shadows were closing in, and there was nothing I could do to escape them. Everything felt like it was crashing down around me. The world I had once known, the life I had lived, now seemed like a distant illusion. What I had believed to be my reality, a normal, simple existence, was shattered. It was as if the very foundation of who I was had been ripped out from under me. My mother's words echoed in my mind, each one a painful reminder that my life had never truly been my own. I had been part of something much bigger, much darker, and I had no idea how deep the roots of this twisted reality went. They were still out there, those people, those powerful figures who had manipulated my existence from the very beginning. They had watched me, followed me, and I had been blind to it all. And now I knew the terrifying truth. They could still find me. They could still use me for their own purposes. The past I had tried to escape, the family I had longed for, had all been tainted by a web of corruption, power, and violence that stretched far beyond my comprehension. But there was something I had learned from all of this, something that flickered through the darkness like a faint glimmer of light. Despite everything they had done to me, despite the years of fear and pain, I still had a choice. The moment I understood the truth, when I saw the chains that had been placed around me from the moment I was born, I realized that there was one thing they couldn't take from me: my will to live, my will to be free. I turned to my mother, who was still sitting across from me, her face pale and drawn. She had told me everything that had been hidden, everything that had shaped my life and my identity. But now, it was time for me to decide what came next. The choices before me were unbearable, but there was no turning back. I had learned the truth about my past, and now it was up to me to forge my future. "I can't keep running," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I can't live in fear anymore. I don't know what they want from me, but I won't let them control me. I won't let them dictate my life anymore." She looked at me with wide eyes, the terror that had gripped her from the start now fully apparent. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't just walk away from this. If you turn your back on them, they'll come for you. They'll find you and they'll make you pay for what you know. You can't escape them. It's too dangerous. You don't know what they're capable of." But in her words, I heard only fear, a fear that had controlled her life for far too long. For her, the past had been a prison that she could never escape. But for me, I could still choose. I had the power to make a decision, to break free from the chains that had held me in place for so long. "I don't care what they do," I said, my voice more resolute now. "I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm not going to let them win. I want to live my life on my terms. If they come after me, so be it. I'll fight. I'll find a way to survive, but I'm not running anymore." She stared at me in stunned silence, and for a moment I thought she might try to stop me, to warn me again, but she didn't. Her shoulders slumped, and a tear escaped from the corner of her eye. For the first time I saw something new in her expression, a mix of sorrow but also pride. It was as if, in that moment, she realized that I wasn't the scared little girl she had once been forced to give up. I was something else now. I was someone who could face the darkness and choose to walk through it, rather than succumb to it. "You've always been stronger than I ever gave you credit for," she said quietly. "I only wanted to protect you from all of this, but now I see that you have your own strength, your own will to survive. I can't stop you, can I?" I shook my head. "No, you can't. I have to do this. I have to take control of my life, no matter how terrifying it is." Her lips trembled and she wiped the tears from her eyes. "I wish I could have done more for you," she whispered. "I wish I could have protected you from all of this, but you're right. You're not a child anymore. You're your own person now. And whatever happens, I'll be here for you. I'll help you however I can. But just know, once you step into this, there's no going back." I took a deep breath, letting the weight of her words sink in. She was right. Once I made this choice, once I decided to take the fight to them, there would be no going back. My life would never be the same. The fear, the danger would follow me wherever I went. But even in the face of that, I felt a sense of clarity. I had been given this life and I had the power to shape it. No one, not even these people who had controlled me, could take that from me. I'm ready, I said, the words firm in my mouth. I know what I'm up against, but I'm ready to face it. I won't be a victim anymore. For a long time, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. The woman who had given me up, the woman who had hidden the truth from me for so long, was now watching me step into a future that was both uncertain and dangerous. But she wasn't stopping me. Then go, she said softly. Go and make your own path. Do what you need to do. I'll be here whatever happens, but remember this, you're not alone. You never were. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't alone anymore. I had my own strength. I had my own will. I had the power to break free from the past, no matter how dark and twisted it had been. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The past, the people who had used me, the danger that still lurked in the shadows, they were all part of me now. But they didn't own me. Not anymore. I was taking back my life one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I would face it head on and I would survive. The door to my past was closed now. What lay ahead was uncertain, terrifying even, but I was ready for it. I was ready to take back control, and no matter what they threw at me, I knew I had the strength to endure. With one final glance at my mother, I turned and walked out into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. The shadows might have been following me, but for the first time in my life, I was no longer running from them.